The afternoon sun was blazing down on us, but I barely noticed it. At 26, I still felt like the same boy who had first fallen in love with cricket in the narrow lanes of my neighborhood. The dusty field where we gathered was rough, uneven, and hardly worthy of being called a ground. But to us, it was our stadium, our sanctuary. My friends and I have been playing there for years, each of us carrying our own stories, responsibilities, and worries outside the boundary lines. But once we stepped in, everything vanished. The bat in my hands felt warm from the heat, its grip slick with sweat, but I tightened my hold anyway. "Come on, bowl me your best one," I shouted at Sammy, who was grinning mischievously as he prepared to deliver. Around us, the rest of the boys were scattered, some shading their eyes with their hands, others laughing at inside jokes that made no sense to anyone outside our group. It was one of those days where time seemed to melt, where the world shrank to just the ball, the bat, and the thrill of the game. I could hear the faint sound of the street beyond, vendors calling, rickshaws buzzing, but they were background music to our match. What mattered was that I was there, with my people, doing something that never failed to light a spark inside me. Sammy ran up, his arms swinging with exaggerated drama, and hurled the ball with all the force he could muster. It spun wildly, bouncing awkwardly on the uneven ground. My instinct took over, and I swung. The connection was perfect, sharp, and satisfying. The ball leapt off my bat with a loud crack and soared higher than I expected. Everyone turned their heads at once, our cheers already rising in our throats. For a moment, it was beautiful, clean, high, powerful. But then the cheers caught in our throats. The ball didn't just sail out of the ground. It flew in the worst possible direction, past the boundary, past the corner tea stall, past a cluster of small shops, and straight into the compound of the police station. The thud, as it landed inside, was distant but unmistakable. Silence fell on the field. "Oh," someone muttered. "Bye. You've done it now," another friend whispered dramatically. I froze, still clutching the bat, my stomach sinking as if I'd swallowed a stone. Of all the places for the ball to go, why there? We had lost balls to rooftops, to drains, to angry neighbors' houses. But this was different. This wasn't just anyone's backyard. It was a police station. The group quickly erupted in nervous chatter. "You go get it," Sammy said, smirking, though his eyes betrayed the same unease I felt. "Why me?" I demanded, though we both knew the answer. "Because you hit it. Your shot, your problem." The others nodded in agreement, forming a circle of grins that didn't reach their eyes. They were amused, yes, but also relieved it wasn't them. None of us were particularly eager to march into the police station uninvited. I looked at the tall brick walls that surrounded the compound. The iron gate was half open, revealing a glimpse of the inner yard. For some reason, it felt more like the entrance to another world than a simple station. I imagined stern officers inside, files stacked high, people waiting with serious faces. My chest tightened. What if they don't give it back? I said, half to myself, what if they think we were causing trouble? Another boy added. I wiped the sweat from my forehead, though it wasn't just the sun making me damp. At 26, I should have been braver, more confident, but in that moment, I felt like a schoolboy again, caught doing something wrong and dreading the punishment. Still, the ball was ours. It wasn't just a rubber sphere wrapped in leather. It was our match, our joy, the very reason we were out here under the punishing sun instead of curled up at home. And besides, I couldn't exactly walk away without at least trying. "Fine," I said finally, forcing a weak grin. "But if I don't come back, tell my mother I died a hero." The boys burst into laughter, the kind that sounded a little too loud, a little too nervous. Sammy patted my back as though sending me off to war. I started walking, each step heavier than the last. The closer I got to the gate, the more aware I became of the pounding in my chest. My eyes darted to the signboard, its bold letters announcing "Police Station," as though to remind me where I was heading. I swallowed hard. As I stepped through the gate, the world seemed to change. The playful shouts of my friends faded behind me, replaced by an eerie quiet. The air felt cooler somehow, the shade of the tall walls cutting off the harsh sun. The ground was clean, swept, the smell faintly metallic and official. I slowed, suddenly hyper-aware of every sound. My shoes crunching on the gravel, the creak of the gate swinging slightly behind me. Somewhere inside, a man's voice called out, stern and clipped. I froze, nerves jangling, before realizing it was just an officer talking to someone unseen. Still, the weight of the place pressed down on me. This was not where boys came to laugh and play. I told myself it was simple. Go in, explain politely, get the ball, and leave. Easy. But my hands trembled at my sides anyway. Come on, I whispered to myself. It's just a ball. Yet somehow, I couldn't shake the feeling that this simple trip into the police station was going to change more than just the outcome of our cricket match. The reception area of the police station looked nothing like the noisy, chaotic world outside. The moment I stepped in, it felt as if someone had turned the volume of life down to zero. The walls were a pale, tired shade of blue, cracked in places where the paint had surrendered to time. A faint smell of dust and old paper hung in the air, mixed with something sharper, perhaps ink or the metallic scent of rusting files. I hesitated near the entrance, my feet suddenly unsure of themselves. To my left was a wooden bench, its surface worn smooth by years of anxious people waiting. On the wall behind it hung a large framed photograph of some dignitary, the glass reflecting the dull glow of the ceiling fan as it rotated lazily. Somewhere deeper in the building, a typewriter clattered, sharp and rhythmic, like the heartbeat of the station itself. I swallowed, my throat dry. My eyes darted around until they landed on a figure standing behind a counter. He was a tall man, broad-shouldered, his khaki uniform pressed with military precision. His cap rested on the counter beside him, revealing short-cropped black hair streaked faintly with gray. His skin was weathered, his jaw set in a way that suggested he had spent years giving orders and expecting them to be followed. He didn't look angry, but he didn't look welcoming either. Just calm, watchful, like someone who had seen everything before and was not easily surprised. For a brief second, I thought of turning around and retreating, but then his eyes met mine, sharp, assessing. My legs moved forward of their own accord, as though pulled by invisible strings. Yes. His voice was steady, low, carrying both authority and patience. I cleared my throat. Sir, our cricket ball. It flew inside. I came to get it. He studied me, his gaze flicking briefly to the sweat on my forehead, the bat still in my hand, the nervous way I shifted my weight. Then he pointed, slow and deliberate, toward a side room across the hall. It rolled in there, he said. I turned my head. The door was half open, revealing only a sliver of the inside, the corner of a desk, a faint beam of light cutting through a dusty window. It looked ordinary enough, but something about it made my stomach twist. Still, I forced myself to nod. Thank you, sir. I walked toward the room, each step echoing too loudly in my ears. My fingers tightened around the bat, not as a weapon but as a comfort, something familiar in a place that felt alien. I nudged the door open wider and stepped inside. The air was cooler here, the light dimmer. A single desk stood in the center, its surface cluttered with papers and a dented metal cup filled with pens. Beside it was a chair that looked too large for the narrow space. Dust motes floated lazily in the shaft of light from the small bar window, as though frozen in time. Against the far wall stood a narrow bed, its blanket folded with military precision. I bent slightly, scanning the floor, expecting to spot the ball rolling in some corner. Nothing. My heart thumped harder. And then, behind me, the sound of the door creaking closed. I spun around, startled. The officer was standing in the doorway, one hand still resting on the knob. The door clicked shut, sealing the room into silence. My mouth went dry. Sir, I said, my voice thinner than I intended. He didn't answer immediately. He stepped forward, his heavy boots thudding against the floor, his gaze never leaving me. For a moment, I felt like a boy again, standing in front of the strict teacher who already knew the truth but wanted to hear me confess it. His words came slowly, each one measured. Why did you throw the ball here? It wasn't shouted, but the weight of his tone crushed me. The question sounded less like curiosity and more like an accusation. My mind raced with explanations, excuses, apologies, but none of them seemed enough. I didn't mean to, I stammered. It was just a shot. It went the wrong way. His eyes narrowed slightly, though his face remained unreadable. He stopped just a few feet away, the air between us thick with tension. I could hear my own heartbeat in my ears. My mind spun with possibilities. Was he going to find me? Scold me? Call my parents? Arrest me? The thought of being dragged out in front of my friends, humiliated, made my stomach churn. I clutched the bat tighter, wishing it could shield me from the weight of his gaze. The silence stretched, heavy, suffocating, until it felt like the walls themselves were leaning in. I shifted my eyes toward the floor, my voice barely above a whisper. "I'm sorry, sir. It won't happen again." For a moment, he didn't respond, and the silence was unbearable. My imagination filled it with every punishment I could think of. The room, once just a simple space with a desk and a bed, now felt like a chamber of judgment. And there I stood, a grown man of 26, trembling like a schoolboy awaiting his sentence. The silence stretched so long that I thought I might choke on it. My palms were slick, and I rubbed them against the side of my trousers, but it did nothing to stop the trembling in my hands. The officer's gaze was steady, unreadable, and it felt like he could see straight through me, through my nervous smile, through the apologies I'd offered, down to every secret fear I was carrying. My mind began to unravel with possibilities, each one darker than the last. What if he arrests me? What if he writes a report, and I end up with a record? What if he fines me so heavily I can't pay? What if my parents find out? What will they think of me, a grown man being scolded like a child for playing cricket in the wrong place? My throat tightened. I imagined my mother's face, equal parts disappointment and worry, her voice echoing. "Why can't you be more careful? Why do you always get into trouble?" My father's silence, heavier than any words. My friends, laughing nervously outside, which spread the story everywhere, and soon it would be the joke of the entire neighborhood. I wanted to explain again, to insist that it was an accident, but the words stuck somewhere between my chest and my mouth. The officer finally spoke, his tone low, but heavy enough to make my knees wobble. "There are consequences," he said. "Always consequences." The way he said it wasn't loud, but it was final, like the tolling of a bell. My stomach lurched. Consequences. The word rang in my head, carrying with it images of handcuffs, a cold cell, shame. I opened my mouth to protest, but before I could, he stepped closer. I instinctively took half a step back, bumping into the edge of the desk behind me. The wood pressed hard against my hip, holding me in place. He was taller than I had realized, his shadow stretching across me as if I were a small boy cowering beneath a teacher's punishment. "You think you can just walk in here, cause trouble, and leave?" he said. His voice was controlled, but it carried a weight that made my chest constrict. "I didn't mean to," I began, my voice breaking. He raised a hand, not angrily, but firmly, and placed it on my shoulder. The contact jolted through me like a current. His palm was heavy, steady, not cruel, but not gentle either. My breath hitched, and my heart began to pound so loudly I was sure he could hear it. "Consequences," he repeated. His hand tightened slightly, and he guided me, not forcefully, but insistently, toward the bed against the far wall. My legs felt wooden, my feet dragging across the tiled floor. Every step closer sent my panic spiraling higher. Why the bed? Why there? The question thundered in my head, drowning out reason. Sweat trickled down the side of my face, and I felt the collar of my shirt stick to my skin. My eyes darted wildly around the room, at the small barred window, at the closed door, at the desk where I had been standing only moments ago. Each glance ended the same. I was trapped. My pulse raced faster and faster, thudding against my ribs like a drum. What if I'm in real danger? What if this isn't just about a ball anymore? My imagination betrayed me with vivid flashes. Being locked in this room, being shouted at, being humiliated. The officer's face was unreadable, giving me no clues. Was this intimidation? A lesson? Something worse? He stopped when we reached the bed, his hand still on my shoulder. I stood stiff as a board, every muscle tensed, afraid to move, afraid to speak. My mouth was so dry I could barely swallow. The bed itself was plain, metal frame, thin mattress, blanket folded neatly at the edge. There was nothing sinister about it, yet standing so close, under his watchful eyes, it became something else in my mind, a stage where I had no control over what happened next. He let his hand linger a moment longer, then withdrew it slowly. The absence of his touch should ever leave me, but it didn't. Instead, it left behind a phantom weight, as if my body remembered it even when it was gone. I couldn't look him in the eye. My gaze dropped to the floor, tracing the faint cracks in the tile. My breathing came shallow and quick, each inhale sharp and jagged. "I'm sorry," I whispered again, the words spilling out like a plea. "Please, it won't happen again." He didn't answer right away. He circled me instead, his boots scraping softly against the floor. I fell in behind me, beside me, then in front of me again. My body trembled, my knees threatening to give way. Is this how it ends? Is this how a stupid cricket ball ruins my life? The silence was unbearable. My thoughts collided with each other in a blur. Maybe he'll keep me here for hours. Maybe he'll make an example of me. Maybe I'll never be able to face anyone again. The fear gnawed at me until it was all I could feel, raw and unrelenting. My chest burned with it, my throat tight as if invisible hands were closing around it. I clenched the bat tighter in my grip, though I wasn't sure if I held it for protection or simply because letting it go would feel like surrender. Finally, he spoke again, his voice still calm but heavy enough to weigh down every word. "Do you understand now?" I blinked, confused, my heart hammering. Understand what? That I was powerless? That I was at his mercy? That I should never have stepped inside? I opened my mouth, but the words wouldn't come. I didn't know what answer he wanted, and the wrong one felt dangerous. Inside, two voices battled. "You're overreacting. He's just teaching you a lesson." Versus "No, something isn't right. Get out, get out." The room felt smaller than it had minutes ago, the walls pressing in, the light from the window dimming. I could hear my own breathing, shallow and fast, echoing louder than it should. My hands shook so much that the bat slipped from my grip and clattered softly against the floor. The sound was small, almost insignificant, yet it felt like a verdict. I stood frozen, my fear so sharp it was almost painful, every part of me bracing for what might come next. For a long, unbearable moment, the room was nothing but the sound of my breathing and the faint hum of the ceiling fan above. My body was rigid, my nerves raw, and I was bracing for something, anything, that would make sense of what was happening. And then, without warning, the officer's expression changed. The stern lines around his eyes softened, his shoulders relaxed, and for the first time since I'd walked into the station, his face no longer looked like carved stone. He sighed, almost as if he'd been holding his breath too, and shook his head lightly. "Young man," he said, his voice no longer heavy with accusation but calmer, almost gentle, "I wanted to scare you. That's all." I blinked, my mind taking a moment to catch up. "Scare me?" I repeated, my voice cracking from both confusion and relief. He gave a small, almost amused smile. "Yes, to make you understand. This is a police station, not a playground. You can't just go hitting balls in here as if it's another empty field. Do you realize where you are? Do you know how serious this place is?" The weight in my chest began to ease, though my heart was still racing from the tension. For the first time, I could breathe properly. My legs, which had been trembling, finally loosened. I trailed off embarrassed. I didn't want to admit out loud the dark possibilities my mind had conjured up. He chuckled softly, not unkindly. "I know what you thought. You're not the first boy I've frightened like this, and you probably won't be the last." The corner of his mouth twitched upward as he gestured toward the bed. "Sit down." I obeyed quickly, not out of fear anymore, but because my legs felt too weak to keep me standing. The mattress was firm beneath me, the blanket's folds neat enough to suggest that no one had used it in days. The officer moved toward the desk, opened a small flask, and poured water into a steel cup. He handed it to me without a word. My hand shook as I accepted it, and I realized only then how parched I was. The cool water slid down my throat, washing away some of the dryness, grounding me back in reality. When I lowered the cup, I found him watching me, his arms folded, but his eyes no longer sharp. They carried something warmer now, something almost fatherly. You know, he began, leaning lightly against the desk, when I was about your age, maybe even younger, I was worse than you. I looked up, startled. Worse. He nodded, his lips curving into a nostalgic smile. Oh, yes. Cricket was everything to me. My friends and I. We weren't happy until we broke in at least one window every other week. I still remember the sound of glass shattering, followed by the chorus of angry uncles running after us. I couldn't help it. A laugh escaped me. Awkward at first, but genuine. The image of the stern man as a mischievous boy chasing after balls and breaking windows was almost too strange to picture. He chuckled with me, the lines of authority on his face softening further. Once, I hit the ball so hard it flew straight into a shopkeeper's glass counter. Shattered the whole thing. My father nearly disowned me that day. What happened? I asked, curiosity replacing my fear. What do you think? He raised an eyebrow. The shopkeeper made me pay, of course. And when I couldn't, my father made me work for him for a month until I had. Every day after school, I cleaned his shop, polished the counters, fetched tea. That was my consequence. He smirked at the word, as though throwing it back at me. I smiled, the tension in my body unwinding little by little. So that's why you... Exactly. He nodded. That's why I scared you. Not because I want to punish you. Not because you've done some great crime. But because sometimes fear teaches faster than words. If I'd simply handed you the ball, you would have laughed with your friends, gone back to your game, and forgotten all about it. I nodded, absorbing his words. He was right. I knew he was. Without this little drama, I would have treated it like nothing. But now, I felt the weight of the mistake in a way I never had before. There was a long pause, but it was no longer heavy. It was easy now, the silence between two people sharing a strange but oddly meaningful moment. Finally, he bent down, reached under the desk, and produced the very thing I had been so desperate for. The cricket ball. Its red surface was scuffed, a faint streak of dust clinging to one side, but it looked like the most precious thing in the world to me in that moment. My eyes lit up as he held it out. I reached for it quickly, but he didn't let go immediately. His gaze held mine, firm, but kind. Remember, he said, a ball is just a ball. But respect for places, for people, that's more important. Don't forget it. I nodded, my throat tight, and whispered, I won't. He let the ball drop into my palm, and I clutched it tightly, as though it were a symbol of my reprieve, my second chance. The officer straightened, brushing invisible dust off his uniform. Good. Then we understand each other. The room didn't feel so small anymore. The walls weren't closing in, and the air wasn't suffocating. Instead, everything seemed lighter, brighter, as though the entire place had shifted with his change in tone. I sat there a little longer, the ball warm in my hand, realizing that the man I had feared moments ago wasn't a monster or a tyrant. He was just someone who had once been a boy like me, someone who had learned his lessons the hard way and now wanted to pass them on. For the first time since I had walked into the police station, I smiled without fear. For a long moment after the officer shared his childhood memory, I just sat there in silence, staring at the cricket ball in my hands. The leather felt rough against my palm, but it carried a weight much heavier than its size. I thought back to how terrified I had been just a few minutes ago, convinced my life was about to take a dark turn. Yet here I was, sitting calmly across from a man who, instead of punishing me, was offering me something I didn't expect, understanding. He leaned back in his chair, folding his arms. His expression wasn't stern anymore. It was firm, yes, but with a gentleness underneath. Do you see now, he said, why you must be careful? This isn't a playground. People come here with problems, real problems. Sometimes with tears, sometimes in anger, sometimes with heavy burdens. It is not a place for cricket balls to go flying into. I nodded quickly, embarrassed. I didn't mean to, sir. It was an accident. Accidents happen, he replied. But responsibility means thinking about what could happen before you act. Do you understand? His words sank into me slowly. I had never thought of cricket as anything more than a game, something light-hearted. But the way he spoke made me realize how careless actions, even small ones, can ripple outward. "I think I understand," I said quietly. "If I had broken a window or hit someone—" "Exactly," he interrupted, pointing a finger at me, but with a smile tugging at his lips. "Then it would not be such a small matter." For the first time since I had walked into that room, I felt safe enough to ask questions. "Did you really used to get in trouble for playing cricket too?" He chuckled, leaning forward on the desk. "Many times. I remember once I hit the ball straight into a neighbor's window. Glass everywhere. The neighbor chased me and my friends down the street with a stick in his hand. I thought I was finished that day. I couldn't help but laugh at the image. It was strange. Just moments ago, I couldn't even breathe properly out of fear, and now I was laughing with a police officer as though we were old friends." The officer's voice softened. "I tell you this because I was once like you, but with time, I learned discipline. That's what life is about, learning when to play and when to respect boundaries. If you don't learn that now, life will teach you later. And trust me, the lessons only get harder." His words carried weight beyond cricket, beyond the walls of the station. I felt as though he was talking about life itself, about choices, about rules, about respect. I asked almost shyly, "So, you're saying even games need responsibility?" He nodded. "Games are good. They build strength, teamwork, joy. But games should never come at the cost of respect, for people, for property, for places. Even when you play, you must know the limits. That balance, young man, is the secret to living well." His tone wasn't harsh. It was thoughtful, like advice passed from an elder to someone who still had a lot to learn. And for the first time, I felt grateful that the ball had landed here, that this accident had led me to a lesson I would never forget. I looked at him carefully. "Sir, do you ever regret becoming a police officer? It seems so serious, compared to when you were a boy playing cricket." He smiled, a faraway look in his eyes. "Sometimes I miss those carefree days, but I don't regret this. My job may be serious, but it matters. People depend on us. And sometimes," he said, looking straight at me, "teaching a young man a small lesson like this is as important as solving a case. Because if I can guide you today, maybe you'll guide someone else tomorrow." I was silent, struck by the unexpected depth in his words. The fear that had shaken me earlier had now transformed into something else. Respect. Respect not just for him, but for responsibility itself. Then, breaking the heavy mood, he leaned back and grinned. "But remember this. Next time you hit a six, make sure it lands outside the ground, not in my station." I laughed so hard I nearly dropped the ball. The sudden shift from seriousness to humor lifted the air completely. "I'll try, sir. I'll try." He shook his head, chuckling. "Not try. Do it. Discipline, remember?" We both laughed then, the tension gone. It felt almost like sitting with an uncle or an older mentor, someone who wanted me to do better, not someone who wished me harm. As I stood up to leave, I felt lighter. The officer had managed to turn my deepest fear into a life lesson I could carry with me. I looked at him one last time before stepping out. "Thank you, sir," I said sincerely. "Not just for the ball, but for everything you said." He waved me off with a smile, as if to say it was nothing. But to me it was something. Something big. As I walked toward the door, the ball tucked firmly in my hand, I realized that fear had taught me something far greater than punishment ever could. Fear had opened the door for wisdom, and that wisdom, passed me in a quiet room of an old police station, would stay with me long after the sound of cricket bats and cheers faded into memory. When the officer finally placed the cricket ball back into my hands, I felt a wave of relief wash over me. It wasn't just about the ball anymore. It was about everything that had happened inside that quiet, dimly lit room. The fear, the confusion, the heavy silence. It all seemed to dissolve into something much lighter. The officer gave me a faint smile, the kind that seemed stern but carried warmth hidden underneath. "Go on," he said, waving toward the door. "Your friends must be waiting. And don't let me catch you playing cricket too close to the station again." I nodded quickly, my heart still racing, but this time it wasn't out of fear. It was the adrenaline of relief, of walking out safe, ball in hand, with a strange new respect blooming inside me. I pushed the door open and stepped back into the corridor, the smell of old papers and ink following me until I reached the main gate. As soon as I stepped outside into the bright sunlight, the contrast hit me. My friends were gathered just beyond the iron gate, waiting like anxious spectators. They had been craning their necks, whispering, no doubt making up wild stories about what was happening to me inside. The moment they saw me emerge, they all straightened up. "Finally!" shouted Samir, his face breaking into a grin. "What took you so long? We thought they'd locked you up for life." Everyone laughed, but I could see the genuine worry in their eyes, quickly masked by humor. I held up the cricket ball like a trophy, my grin spreading wider. "Mission accomplished," I said, trying to sound casual even though my voice still had the faint tremor of my earlier panic. They cheered, clapping and patted my back as though I had just scored the winning run in a championship match. For a moment, I played along, basking in their celebration. But deep down, something had shifted. We started walking back toward the ground, the late afternoon sun painting long shadows across the road. My friends, as expected, wanted to hear every detail. "So what happened?" Adil asked eagerly. "Did the officer yell at you? Did he fine you? Did he make you sign some paper?" I hesitated, then decided to tell the story, not in a way that would scare them, but in a way that carried the weight of what I just learned. Well, I began slowly. He did scare me at first. Closed the door, asked me why I threw the ball there. For a second, I thought my life was over. Their eyes widened, and a ripple of laughter broke through. "I knew it," laughed Imran. "I told you they'd interrogate you like a criminal." Wait, I interrupted, raising a hand. That's not how it ended. He wasn't angry for long. He just wanted me to understand how serious it is. That this is a police station, not some playground wall. They fell silent for a moment, absorbing my words. Then Samir chuckled. "So, basically, he gave you a lecture?" "Not just a lecture," I replied, shaking my head. "He told me about his own childhood, about how he used to get into trouble playing cricket, too. He wasn't trying to punish me. He was trying to teach me something." As we reached the cricket ground again, the familiar sights and sounds greeted us. The rough pitch, the half-broken wickets, the laughter of kids waiting for their turn. But I noticed it all differently now, as if I had been given a new lens. I looked at the ball in my hand, feeling its weight. It wasn't just leather and stitching anymore. It carried a memory, a story, and a lesson. Sometimes life throws you into situations you don't expect. Ones that scare you, confuse you, make you imagine the worst. But sometimes those very moments end up teaching you something valuable. That was a thought echoing in my head as I retook my position at the crease. My friends were still buzzing, joking about how I had made friends with the police and how maybe next time I should just invite the officer to play. Their laughter was infectious, and I found myself laughing too. The heaviness from earlier was gone, replaced by lightness, almost joy. As I prepared to face the next ball, I glanced once more toward the police station in the distance. Its walls stood tall, solid, and unbothered by the day's events. But for me, it would never just be a building again. It would always remind me of the lesson hidden behind that closed door. Responsibility, respect, and the strange way fear can sometimes guide you toward wisdom. The bowler ran up, his footsteps thudding against the dry ground. He released the ball, and with a swing of my bat, I sent it flying high. Not toward the police station this time, but clear across the field where it landed safely in the grass. My friends cheered. I laughed out loud, my heart light. As the game continued, I knew I would remember this day for a long time. Not because of the scare, but because of the ending, safe, hopeful, and strangely heartwarming. Sometimes life puts you in rooms you don't want to enter, only to let you walk out stronger than before. And that day, as the sun dipped lower and shadows stretched across the cricket ground, I felt grateful for my friends, for the game, and yes, even for the officer who had taught me, in his own way, that lessons often come disguised as fear. Because in the end, I wasn't just walking out with a cricket ball. I was walking out with something far more valuable, a story, a memory, and a reminder that sometimes even the scariest moments can end in laughter.